The Johnny-come-lately authors who emerge from out of nowhere in order to get rich off of the newest trend in our culture often borrow from the pre-existent Christian authors' work, these heroes of the faith, and they never even give them credit, but rather take credit for themselves. I find this kind of behavior an outrageous shame. As an author, I do admit this is my first book, but may it never be said that I'm one of those people who are ripping people off, or God forbid, one of the hucksters who want to profit off of the most recent tragedy. I fully admit that my knowledge of Islam, second only to reading Islam's primary source reference works, the Quran and the Hadith, in which the religion has been systematized, my knowledge of Islam pretty much comes from the Christian heroes' works that came before me, and from other books about Islam that I've read. I fully intend to give credit where credit is due, but I also feel a strong need to remove myself or separate myself from the people who last year at this time didn't care about Islam, but now they're putting out a book and all of a sudden they're an expert about it and they care about it strictly because it's a hot, marketable topic right now. This is sin as far as I'm concerned. Anyone who knows me knows that in late 1999 I began writing a Bible tract booklet called Exodus from Mecca, which later became a book that I changed the title to and called Quranic Chaos. And then it was changed to Terrible Tuesday before becoming what you have in your hand right now, Manhattan Massacre. While it's taken a long time to get into print due to multiple format changes, as well as issues that I've run into, challenges in my own personal life, the study of Islam is nothing new to me by any stretch. It certainly is not a subject that I simply jumped onto because it became popular. As my career as a Christian author progresses over the coming years in the future, what you're going to see is this is probably one of several books that I need to write about Islam. I will even be providing a Christian answer to Islam after it goes out of style in the culture and in the church, because my concerns about it are actually real. Rest assured that you are not reading the work of a trend follower by working your way through this book. Ask anyone who has known me for the previous 5 years before the attack, and they will tell you you are not reading the work of a man who's going to quote others without giving them their due credit or try to pass off their thoughts as though they are mine. There are enough authors out there like that already. You're reading the work of a man who is grateful to the warriors of the Christian faith who went on before him onto the battlefield to fight Islam, and will continue to point you towards their work whenever the opportunity presents itself. And you're reading the work of a man who's sincere in his desire to wake people up to the truth of what's really going on in our country and what's really taking place as it relates to Islam, Jihad, and terrorism. You deserve to know the truth. In the rest of this book, you will read irrefutable documentation that, contrary to what's being circulated today, Islam does teach violence. Non-Muslims are the targets or intended victims of this violence. Muhammad's teachings are forever preserved in the Quran and the Hadith. Muhammad is more qualified than George W. Bush to say what Islam teaches because Muhammad systematized Islam and Bush did not. And I'm more qualified than George W. Bush to say what Islam teaches because I've studied Muhammad's writings in the Quran and the Hadith, and he has not. So before gulping down what he, President Bush, or any other politician or news media person is trying to feed you, I hope you'll take into consideration what I've written here. You'll gain more from this book than from attending one of those trendy and popular interfaith gatherings. These things are becoming dangerously popular right now. You know the kind where on the stage you have a Buddhist monk, a Muslim imam, a Christian quote-unquote minister, a Roman Catholic priest, a witch, an American Indian shaman, an African witch doctor, and all kinds of other people running the show. Their intent is to get all people of all world religions together to pray to what they call the quote-unquote universal deity. Meetings of this kind, whether in the public square or on the university campus or in the conference room at your local corporation that you might even work at, these are all cheap theatrics and showmanship. They're fake. You won't leave a meeting of this kind knowing anything more about the attacks of September 11th, 2001 than you knew when you came in. It won't answer any of the questions that you have about the attacks. All you will have accomplished is having wasted 2 or 3 hours of your time. This was an ugly day in American history. American history will always be divided into before this event and after this event. You are a thinking person. You have real and intelligent questions about what happened and why. Don't you think that you deserve to have your curiosity satisfied? If there's a real threat out there, or even if the threat is only possibly, potentially real, don't you think you owe it to yourself and to your family to, at the very least, have some knowledge about it, to wrestle with it, to think through it? I'm pretty sure that if and when another such attack happens, that it's not your intent to be among the uninformed people looking around in the chaotic aftermath and asking the question of why. September 11th, 2001 was the logical end of the religion of Islam. Is Islam really a religion of peace? Yes, it is a religion of peace. Not of peace, P-E-A-C-E, but of peace, P-I-E-C-E. It's a piece of you laying on one block and another piece of you laying on the ground 3 blocks away. It's a piece of a burning building crashing down onto an innocent person. So yeah, in that sense, I guess a case could be made for the peacefulness, or rather P-I-E-C-E, fullness of the religion of Islam. The end result of Islam is disorder and chaos and burning to the ground as everything blows up into pieces and people are mangled, tortured, and ripped up into pieces. It's a religion of pieces. As you enter into the rest of this book, just remember that this author was one of the very few people who were not surprised by the attack of September 11th, 2001. I was not among the people running around chaotically throughout the nation asking why. I didn't have to. I already knew why. And I can also say with sadness that something just like it will happen again. How do I know? Because this date of September 11th, 2001 was not an isolated incident, but rather it was just the beginning. This was not a few misguided fanatics. It was Islam's holy book being carried out by real Muslims who knew exactly what they were doing. When it happens again, please don't be surprised by it. This book is attempting to sound the alarm. If you were in the majority and were caught off guard on September 11th, 2001, I have good news for you. You don't have to be caught off guard by the next one. Perhaps you can even be used by God as an instrument to help prevent it. Chapter 2, The Day America Stood Still. The news and the government worked together to give the American people a smokescreen. It was bad enough that such horror had taken place. America had been attacked from inside by her own Muslim community. It had resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent people. But then the problem was added to or compounded by news anchor men and women who refused to give the common people something they deserve, the honest truth. The liberal media wasted no time in getting their faces in front of a camera and telling us all that the ones who had attacked our country were not true Muslims, but much the opposite, were a small minority group, a deviant group of fanatics and radicals. And of course, none of these news anchor people had the courage to interview any real experts who actually knew what they were talking about. They didn't even interview anyone who believed differently than the view of Islam that they were trying to persuade the public to believe. Talk about bias in the media. You were not furnished with a diversity of ideas in terms of the discussion about this event. The truth about September 11th, 2001 had about as much of a chance on TV as a non-white person has in front of an angry Ku Klux Klan lynch mob. In short, there was no chance for truth. There were a handful of us who had been studying Islam before this event had ever happened, and we all knew that the media was lying through their teeth. Either they are extremely ignorant, or they have no problem lying to the people. Pick your choice, either A, B, or a little bit of both. But either way, the facts in their entirety were never made available to the people. Some of us knew this attack was coming before it did because Islam teaches its followers to do things like this. That's why the time has never been more critical than now for me to get this book into print. If they don't tell you the truth, I will. The blindfolds need to be removed from the people's eyes now while America still stands. Was the media's story that they'd put out immediately after the attack, was that story correct? Was this attack just simply a one-time deal that's never going to happen again? Was it done by people who were lacking in their understanding of the Quran and the Hadith? Or were they genuine Muslims who were seeking to obey the Quran and the Hadith and the commands in them to attack all people who were non-Muslim? Did they hold to the classic Islamic interpretation of these texts? Personally, this author believes that they were real Muslims, that they were carrying out and obeying the teachings of Islam as found in the Quran and the Hadith. Why do I say that? You're about to find out. You're going to be surprised at the direction in which the evidence actually points. The idea that this was not done by real Muslims is not true at all, and it's about to be dismantled for you. It was indeed done by true Muslims who knew the Quran and its classic right, historical, grammatical, contextual, linguistical interpretation very well. The attacks executed. September 11th, 2001 is a day we will never forget. On that faithful morning, a group of 18 or more Muslim men went out on a dark, wicked, and evil mission in the name of Allah, and as we will read very soon, in obedience to the Quran. They broke up into groups and attacked and hijacked at least 4 planes that we know of. These were regular airplanes, just commercial flights made up of ordinary and innocent men, women, and children. Just average citizens who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. These Muslim soldiers chose planes leaving from various East Coast cities and whose destinations were the West Coast. This was because a plane that is on a trip across the continental United States would, no doubt, be filled with maximum fuel. And on impact, the more fuel, the more fire. And the more fire, the greater devastation and destruction that can be made against an intended target. This was a carefully planned and precisely executed operation against America, which in the Middle East and Muslim-dominated countries is called the Great Satan of the West. Many people hate that about us, that we have freedoms not available in that part of the world, and are even jealously angry at us, not only for our freedom, but because we've always historically fought for freedom all around the world. Since Islam is opposed to freedom, then it's understandable how its followers would want to stop a country that cares about spreading and defending freedom. These Muslims saw this attack as a jihad, a yihada, or a holy war against a wicked nation. The sacred Muslim writings tell Muslims that anyone who dies in the great cause, fighting against the unbelievers or the non-Muslims for Allah and for his messenger Muhammad, will ascend straight into paradise. They will not pass go. They will not collect $200. They are promised immediate entrance into the Muslim concept of heaven. This, by the way, is not like the Christian concept of heaven, but it is a wicked and goofy kind of heaven. I may deal with this later in a future book. But this motivation is why many Muslim young people, young men and boys in particular, have no problem whatsoever carrying out suicide bombings and self-sacrificing attacks of that nature. This is what the terrorists on those planes had on their minds on that now famous Tuesday morning. They wanted to strike a blow against what they perceived as an infidel, unbelieving or non-Muslim nation, and ascend straight to paradise as payment for services rendered. Of the 4 hijacked planes that they all took over at the exact same time like clockwork, 2 of them were smashed in a suicide mission into 2 twin towers of a structure that once existed in New York City called the World Trade Center. The third one was crashed into the Pentagon and took out a big portion of that American government building and also killed everybody on board. And the 4th plane was possibly targeted for the White House. But inside this 4th plane, some brave passengers who'd already heard about the 3 other crashes and figured they were about to die anyway. And the 4th one rushed the terrorists, took over the cockpit, and in a struggle they thwarted the plot, and the plane didn't make it to D.C. in order to strike the White House. It ultimately crashed. The courageous passengers who fought against their Muslim hijackers actually caused their plane to crash in a rural field in Pennsylvania. The people on these planes, on this particular plane, are heroes. In New York, after having burned a while, the 2 twin towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. They were absolutely huge buildings, the taller of the 2 being 110 stories. When they came down, they crushed thousands of people who were still stuck inside. The aftermath. In the moments and days that followed, there was chaos, not just on the East Coast, but all over the nation and even in other countries. All sporting events were canceled. No airplanes were allowed to fly over American airspace. Even commercial flights were all canceled, and people became stranded in whatever city they happened to be in at the time the attack took place. The stock market closed. There was no postal service. Life in the busiest country on the planet had come to a standstill. You couldn't even escape by turning the TV on to your favorite TV news shows, because all you could receive on any channel, regular networks or cable, was live coverage of the disaster. You couldn't escape by turning on the radio, because even the top 40 pop music stations were playing up-to-the-minute coverage of the latest developments of this disaster. I even remember trying to pop in a home movie in order to escape media coverage. But that failed too, because the particular film I chose had been made in New York City a few years earlier, and every time they showed the skyline of that beautiful city, I could see the 2 twin towers. And it made me think, amazing. These 2 buildings in this movie in real life aren't even standing anymore. To this very day, every time I watch a movie that was shot in New York City before September 11th, 2001, it's become a weird habit of mine to look for shots of the Twin Towers. Seeing the skyline now without them is like looking at a kid who's missing his 2 front teeth. There's a gap there that we're just not used to seeing yet. All I could do was tune into the news. It was an absolute mess. People desperately searched hospitals for their missing loved ones, praying that they were alive somewhere and not among the dead. Firefighters and policemen worked double shifts. They refused to leave the scene. They stayed behind to dig through the wreckage in hope of finding some survivors. Some even worked to their physical limits, became exhausted, and passed out right there on the street. When they got a little sleep, they woke back up and resumed their work immediately. The courage of the New York City fire and police departments will go down to be legendary. Cannot be overstated. It'll go down in history. Forget about Spider-Man. Forget about the Incredible Hulk. The real heroes are the New York City Fire Department and the New York City Police Department. These are the people our kids should be looking up to in this generation. The media's view alone becomes the established way of viewing this event. Other guesses not tolerated. I'd studied Islam for 4 years before this event happened, and I'd been called all kinds of names for daring to publicize the results of my research verbally and in booklets. But now my studies became the in thing to have some knowledge about. Islam and Jihad now became common words in our everyday English language, and people rushed to learn what they could about them.